listening to the 14th source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses in the episode for Friday, September 29th, 2023.
Wow, Dan, what an episode we had last week. I mean, we just hit all the topics. It was just like that. We were just on fire.
Got news coverage. It was wild. They're like, wow, these two guys who've been trucking for almost 10 years really put a dent in the scene.
Award-winning episode.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Or we
unfortunately didn't make it to the feed. Yeah, that's the weird part.
Or we skipped it because, you know what?
We skipped it because I had COVID.
You had the vids.
For the second time.
Well, it's that time of year, unfortunately.
Right, there's a new strain that has come around, and it is extremely viral. So I would mask up if you're worried about it. It's funny because, like, at the beginning of the week that I got it, there was an email that went out through the university saying, "Hey, there's like this new thing going on, and be careful." Then by Friday, they sent out this email going, "Be effing careful. Everybody's getting it." And it apparently just like swept through my entire university. And I was out the following week. You can probably still hear it in my voice a little bit. I will say, again, being the second time I've had it, which again, I'm not proud of, especially since it's my second time in less than a year. Well, it was much more mild than before. In fact, I had zero symptoms aside from a cough. I had no fever, no grogginess, no sort of heavy head, no real congestion except for maybe like one day. All I had was this weird cough, and the biggest symptom I had was actually a side effect of that symptom. I blew out my voice for about 3 days straight. The only sounds that were coming out of my mouth were like whispers and squeaks because my vocal cords were basically paralyzed. It was kind of horrifying considering my day job is talking.
Right.
I'm still working through it, but working through the voice thing. I'm testing negative. I am free and clear for 6 months, I guess.
Yeah, I think the real thing, I'm going to say this because I work also at a university, and I'll say, while I don't think people are talking that much about it, like there have been a lot of cases of COVID. I think, I can say in the last week alone, 4 people I work with tested positive. And the joke was that like several of them all tested positive, I think like 3 of the 4, after Welcome Back to Campus event where they all were there, right?
Right.
So,
and it's, yeah. But everybody that I know, which is apparently a lot of people, that got this most recent strain has reported its relative mild experience, especially for those that have been previously vaccinated and whatnot. So, the idea of it just becoming endemic, of just being, every year we get a flu shot and a COVID shot, that seems to be happening, which is good. Although I still don't recommend getting it because it sucks, especially when you have to miss a week of work. The strangest side effect, I would say, of it is that I was so COVIDified, I watched anime.
Wow.
Yeah. I won't go into too much detail about it because the only thing I can really say is like it was good. I watched a 12-episode show from the story of how this show got made is kind of bizarre, but it's a series that takes place in the long time anime franchise Mobile Suit Gundam. And I've heard a lot about it. I always thought like mechs were cool, or mecha. I'm not sure which one is which. And Gundam I always heard was kind of cool, and depending on which series you watch. And so I was recommended by the internet and people on the internet that there are a couple series that you could start with. And I watched, hold on, let's read the whole the whole series title. Mobile Suit Gundam, the 8th MS Team.
Okay.
Sure. And it was fun. It was nice. It was short. It was kind of exactly what I wanted. It was like a sort of a vintage anime that was short and was a complete story. And it was perfect for someone that was self-quarantining in his own home because he didn't want his wife to get COVID. And she didn't, by the way. I want to make that clear.
That's good.
Successfully quarantined. Luckily, I'm well now. Got all the anime out of my system. Dodged a bullet there.
That's good.
But
that's good.
But if you know of any other good mech or mecha anime, dear listeners, that's not Neon Genesis Evangelion, please let me know, because mechs are cool. Speaking of cool, or not cool, or maybe cool, we wanted to just touch in this week because while we were gone, some like interesting stuff happened that, while maybe got reported on or discussed in the moment, I feel like it's something that should, especially among like indie creators and people creative people doing their own thing, we should focus a spotlight on it, because it's really interesting and really weird what happened. Now, for those that don't know, there's a comic book series called Fables that is published by DC Comics. It was originally published by their sort of creator-owned imprint called Vertigo, and it's a series created by writer Bill Willingham. I think the artist he did the comic with was Mark Buckingham. And it's been a series that's been that I guess ran its original series for 150 issues from like 2002, I think, and then had recently started up like a new 12-issue sort of mini series. But it was announced a couple weeks ago through Bill Willingham's Substack, I think.
Yeah, his Substack.
He has made Fables, which he still owned the IP still completely. He made it public domain. I don't know what's the right language to say. He made it public domain. He put it into the public domain.
Yeah.
What's the right way?
I'd say he put it released it to the public domain. Now it works.
Which brings us to why we would talk about it, because copyright's something we have a lot of interest in, and Andrew has a bug up his ass about in a lot of ways. And it's a really interesting thing to happen, especially in the context of what we've talked about with regard to copyright and ownership over the years.
So what I will say to start is that it's actually. I suspect that this is actually going to drag out. That this is not going to be clean, because I suspect that DC is going to lawyer him. I've seen several different commentaries on what it means, what he did, what effect it could have, or what it could mean. Part of it is that we don't necessarily know who actually, like, what he owned and what he didn't. Right. And, he was writing for Vertigo, which was, creator owned comics. But like, so it's like, but didn't DC own something? Right. I don't know.
Right.
And that is definitely part of the question. But I think the way to think about it, the way to look at it is like, hey, if he's got this agreement where he's licensing this to DC, and then he says, you know what, though, I'm going to actually surrender my copyright to the public domain. Is that, people, I've had people ask me, like, can he do that? And the truth is, it depends. It depends on the contract he had, the license, right? Because usually you'll have a license that you can only license it to this person, right? It's a something like that. Sure. Well, he's not licensing it to someone else. And he's
transferring ownership, right? To
well,
the planet.
No, he's not transferring ownership. That's the thing, is that, like, because I guarantee you there's a non-transferable aspect or whatever. Like, he can't go transfer, like, there'd be some process, right? He's actually basically destroying or eliminating that ownership right. Which, I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't something anyone contracted for.
Right.
Because you could imagine that someone's going to start putting in a line in these contracts that says, if they even still do them that way, it says, like, you can't release this to the public domain. Like, we have some first claim to it. But you can imagine it, when they wrote the original contract, no one thought that would happen. Like, why would it doesn't. That's not something so I could believe that's something that wouldn't have been contracted around potentially. But yeah, it creates this weird scenario where if it goes the way he thinks it's going to go, which we don't know if it will, he's basically saying, like, look, I'm actually in a licensing agreement with DC, but you're not. like
I mean, he literally says that. Yeah.
He can't make Fable stuff with other people. He can't license it to other people. But if it goes the way he thinks, everyone else just has free claim to it because it's not owned by anybody.
Right.
It's a weird. And like I said, I suspect that there's going to be a lot of hubbub about it. But I actually think what I find more interesting is he couches it in this, other than DC's a bunch of shitheads, he really spends time talking about how his perspectives on copyright and ownership have really changed a lot as he's gotten older. And he's basically saying, look, I actually think maybe 20, 25 years is the right number. And that this should go to the public domain, right? Maybe it's had its run.
Right. And that's an interesting perspective, because usually we hear these numbers or these arguments made more academically, right? Based on people that have read the history, understand as well as you can the copyright law as it exists now. But this is an interesting perspective because it's someone that he's not just saying that academically, he's saying that as someone that has the experience. Like, he's literally been in this business with this property for 20 plus years now. And that's the conclusion he's coming to, right?
And he's in theory the kind of person that you would think would argue for the more, right? The Sonny Bono of, I think it should be forever or whatever, right?
Right.
But he's saying, no, actually, I think 25 is a good number. And I don't know. I think everyone agrees that copyright as it exists is probably too ridiculous. Like, it goes too long. Right. It creates too many, it basically, like, it has a detrimental effect to everything. And, the fact that, like, what is it? I think the public domain year we're in is 1927.
Okay.
Right? Like, 1920, things produced in 1927 became public domain this year, in the year of our Lord 2023. Like, yikes.
Thank you, Disney.
So I don't know. I think this case is interesting. I suspect that we're not going to hear much of it. I suspect DC's going to they're going to try to settle with him. Although he's apparently says,
well,
like, man, he's got
a
hate list that, like, apparently they don't pay him or whatever. Like, it's a real.
It's interesting what you brought up, because, like you said, people hadn't, a lot of people, at least at the time, they were making contracts with him in the early 2000s. They weren't considering people putting their own stuff into the public domain. That's an interesting and poetic kind of flip of one of the reasons why he's pissed at DC. Looking at a Substack, he's like, they told him that they had no obligation whatsoever to protect the integrity and value of the IP, either from themselves or from third parties, such as the Telltale game that was based on Fables called Wolf Among Us, who want to radically alter the character settings, history, and premise of the story. Nor did they owe me any money for licensing Fables rights to third parties, since such a license wasn't anticipated in our original publishing agreement. And, like, so with that last line, it's always like, well, do you know what else wasn't anticipated in our original publishing agreement? Public domain. And so it's almost like, you slap me, I slap you back kind of thing.
Oh, yes, definitely.
So, and especially in one of the reasons why he said he's not going maybe more traditional legal route is, one, the money involved. DC's very big. He is one person, and he cited his age. He's not like super old, but he's like, I'm 67. Like, fighting with DC over something like this could drag out decades. I don't want to spend that time
into his death,
which is fair, right? But I guess the question I have is, like, is there, like, paperwork you file to go to put your IP into public domain before the 100 years or 70 years or whatever is up? Or, like, do you know? Like, what is there any process? Obviously, there is some sort of process for this.
I actually have no idea. I'll admit, it's not even something you think about, right?
Right. Or is it just enough to say so in a Substack post?
That's actually, it's something I probably should have looked up. I've never even thought about it. Like, I didn't even think, like, yeah, is there a process? Do I file a thing with the copyright office saying, hey, rescinded?
I should know that, since I filed stuff with the copyright office, but I don't, because who would do that?
Well, but that's the thing is, and I suspect there isn't even, like, a process for it, because it's weird, right? Mm-hmm. I suspect that in general, the way it kind of works is that people basically just choose not to enforce it,
right? And
then it eventually expires. Yeah, I don't know, but maybe there's a thing where you can send it to the copyright office. I mean, copyright's weird. I was reading another thing about how, like, just the fact that it is kind of not make believe, but, like, it's a thing we say exists because we think it's valuable, but then we also let you do, like, you can transfer it, you can give it, you can do whatever with it. It is definitely a weirder concept. Like, in terms of, like, rights and things, because it's also like we talk about rights and we say like, oh, you have a right to vote, but we don't let you sell your vote. We don't let you, but well, copyright, you could do whatever. You could sell it, you could transfer it, you could release it, you could get rid of it, you could throw it away. You know, it's a weird thing. I suspect we won't hear a lot out of what happens with this.
Right.
But I do really find it interesting, and I actually hope anything that gets a conversation started about copyright and how so broken it is. I'm glad people are talking again. You know.
Right. And it's important to note that him doing this doesn't release him from his contract. He still owed money that if he's owed money, as he says he is, from licensing and all that kind of stuff. Right. Then he still owed that, and he still makes money off of any books that DC publishes. But you say that there'll probably be a long time going forward of DC litigating with, or at least trying to negotiate with Bill Willingham. But I kind of see it like, wouldn't they actually be more like trying to slap down? I guess they have enough money to do both. Slap down people that are executing this public domain right for Fables. Well,
yeah, and I guess that's really the kind of, well, but that, of course, in that process, I suspect it's going to drag him in too, right?
Sure.
As the licensee, whatever.
Sure.
I don't know. It's going to be weird. And I was actually reading someone else's analysis where they talked about just also the idea of what is it if he does own something, what is it? What is he allowed to public domain, right? Because I suspect art, I would guess he doesn't own the art from the original publication.
Right.
I suspect that's either owned by the artist who drew it or by DC.
Right.
So it's that thing like, okay, well, he's releasing it, but he can't release, like, you can't do anything with the art, maybe? Like, who knows?
Yeah, you can't do anything that's previously published, it sounds like.
Well, so, right.
But you can make your own new shit.
Well, this is where it gets weird, because, like, what is it that he actually owns the copyright to? That's the thing.
He says in his Substack post just the IP.
But that's not something you own a copyright to.
True.
Right. It's you own like a creative expression, right? You own a book, you own a video, a musical performance, a dance, a painting.
Right.
So the idea that he doesn't own the art, right? Maybe, but he does own maybe the text.
Sure.
Which is something. I'm not dismissing it. It's something, but it is like, okay, so you can make your own Fables story,
right?
But with your own art. Maybe
it's interesting too because you can also own characters, right?
No,
but Fables, by its principle, is kind of
you don't really own characters. You own creative expressions, right?
Okay.
Now, usually the idea is that you own the story Rocky, so you pretty much own Rocky, but you don't own Rocky. You own the movie. You own the story that is Rocky.
Right. I guess you can own, like, you can copyright a character design. I've done that
as an image, right?
Yeah. Yes. And but the interesting thing with Fables is that it's already kind of playing with public domain properties. It's sort of a modern noir retelling, a modern noir story, fantasy story, using, as the name implies, fairy tale characters just in modern and repurposed for modern contexts and stories. So, like, maybe there's some wiggle room there already. Like, does he own anything? he just took characters. He took the big bad wolf and made him a detective. Right. Anybody can already do that.
Right. And this is actually where copyright and copyright enforcement gets really challenging, especially when you get into things that are like that look like or sound like. Right. Because it's very easy to say, I like to reference the Rocky 3 case or Rocky 4, because Rocky 4, actually, there was a legal suit over the movie related to copyright. And that one's very easy.
Robot?
What?
Due to the robot?
No, Rocky 4 the movie. There's no robot.
Isn't there? Doesn't his dad? I haven't seen it, but his dad has like a helper robot. Or is that 5?
I think it's 5. No, Rocky 4 was because basically the lawsuit goes back to someone saying, I pitched this script idea to you, therefore it's mine, and you infringed on my copyright. And the takeaway was, well, actually, but the idea was a derivative work of the original movie Rocky, therefore it's actually owned by Sylvester Stallone. Or it's something he controls is the owner of the original work. So, but the idea is that, like, it's not the character that necessarily Now you can sometimes have like distinctive characters or distinctive things that somehow you say are inseparable from the creative expression, right? But and you would obviously you would have images, you would have. But if I like write a book about a cowboy who wears his underpants in a town in Nevada,
impossible, I say.
Like, is it infringing? Maybe. Like, at what point? I mean, depends on what he does. Is he part of? Is he a member of a gang of 3 guys all named the same thing? I don't.
That's the most ridiculous idea. You should never do that.
Yeah, that's just never do that. No one wants to see
no one wants to see that.
No one wants to see that. But anyway, so it's a challenge, and that's why the kind of cases often don't really get settled. Like they don't go to court, or they get settled out of court. It's a whole, and it's a challenge though, because I think companies like DC and Disney and stuff, they really want you to believe they can own like the idea of a superhero or whatever, right? Like,
right.
No, you can't. Like,
well, isn't that the joke that Marvel and DC like co-trademarked the word superhero or something like that?
Well, and then trademark's different, but yeah, they. Right. So it's so again, I think what I'm trying to say is, who even knows what this guy actually owns to put into the public domain? But you know what?
Right.
Bravo, sir.
And just doing it asks a lot of questions and kind of puts DC on its heels in some shape or form. So, I mean, I guess Disney did its hard work to redefine copyright. Now DC gets a swing. We'll see if anything comes out of it. I mean, it's not like nothing against it. Fables has been a long-running and praised and beloved series for years, but it's not The Walking Dead level of cultural penetration, right? So it's relatively small potatoes. I don't mean to diminish the impact or importance of that book, but it's, I think there's also a reason why if this were happening with The Walking Dead, for example, I think it would have been much bigger news in a lot of ways. But unfortunately, if I feel like DC is going to come out on top. I mean, who knows actually, because DC and Warner Brothers is so mismanaged right now. Maybe the right side of history will win in this case. I don't know. We'll see.
Who knows?
So keep an eye out for a new comic book made by a podcast for all intents and purposes. It's called Fables, a podcast story coming soon to a nowhere near you. I don't have time to do that shit. Make my own comic book. So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page of this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can find us on other social media as well, such as the places that Andrew and I frequent, which means you can find me on Instagram at @DBethelComics, and you can find Andrew on Mastodon at ProfoundDark@Dice.camp.
While you're at our website at forallintents.net, you can also follow the link in the corner that says YouTube, where you will find our YouTube page. Or you may be there already listening to our show as it is simulcast in YouTube. If you do, please like and subscribe, or as the kids like to say, ring that bell.
We use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusi, the other is called District 4. They're both written and performed by Kevin MacLeod, the Clan MacLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 attribution license.
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more, though, would be to leave some sort of review, whether a text review or using the service's proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms. I think we should shut things down. I'm already losing my voice. I should go back to voice rest here. But
yeah, whatever you're doing ain't helping.
We can't deny the fact, Andrew, and losing one's voice, especially one whose profession is talking, is kind of scary, which is appropriate because we're entering spooky season.
Oh, that's true. It's true. I'm very afraid.
We welcome back Spookytober. And boy, do we have plans for you, dear listener. No, we don't.
Do we?
No, we don't. Maybe we'll watch some spooky stuff. Maybe we'll talk about spooky stuff, but it'll probably be on accident.
As it often is.
As it often is, the purpose is for 2 friends of a certain amount of years to get together and hang out and catch up. And so until you catch up with a dear friend, dear listeners, maybe that's us. Maybe we're the friends you're catching up with. I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast. I'm all right. I'm just, chilling.
Maxin?
Relaxing.
All cool?
Shooting some b-ball.
Outside of the school when a couple of guys who are up to no good thought I'd make a trouble in my neighborhood.
So I had a taco and I put a hot sauce on it. It's very hot.
Well, that's the appropriate place for a hot sauce. I'll say that.
Extra obnoxious, activate. Woo! Obnoxious.
Initiate extra obnoxious protocol.
Persona!
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more, though, would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you have. I'm caught in a trap. Okay,